panel of eminent speakers who've been in the forefront of both campaigning as well as research on the theme of gender and the Hindu right in India. Before I introduce these speakers to you, I want to just briefly explain the reasons why we're holding this event at this time. It's of course timely because we are in the run-up now to International Women's Week, and perhaps more importantly, it's particularly timely because the last several days have been the anniversary of the genocidal attacks on the Muslim minority community in Gujarat, which took place in 2002. And as we know, the survivors of those attacks are still waiting for justice. This event has been organized by the Gender Institute. I teach at the Gender Institute. My name is Kalpana Wilson, and I'm going to be chairing the event. And it's been organized in collaboration with two activist organizations. The first is the Freedom Without Fear platform, which was set up last year in solidarity with the anti-rape movement in India. And it's a coalition of groups and individuals which seeks to provide an arena for Black, South Asian and minority ethnic women to lead discussions and campaigns on violence against women in Britain. And there's more information about that organization which is circulating here. And the other organization is the South Asia Solidarity Group, which has been supporting and publicizing struggles against communalism and fascism in South Asia for the last 2 decades. And this last 2 decades is the period when we have seen the concerted rise of the Hindu right in India, which has now brought us to this historical moment when many people are observing a threat of fascism at the national level with Narendra Modi's Prime Ministerial bid. Now, of course, Narendra Modi, as you know, is the candidate of the BJP, but we have to remember that Modi represents not just a political party, but a family of organizations, the Sangh Parivar, a family of Hindu supremacist parties, mass organizations, paramilitary groups, and stormtroopers. And at its core is the RSS, which is an authoritarian, militarist, cadre-based organization, which was formed in the mid-1920s. It was formed at a time when we're seeing the rise of fascist parties in Italy, later in Germany, and it directly took inspiration from the rise of these parties. Notoriously, the RSS leader, M.S. Golwalkar, talked about Hitler's treatment of the Jews as a model of race pride, which India should emulate. Now, of course, Narendra Modi is not in any way new to the political scene. He has been the Chief Minister of Gujarat since 2001. And he is referred, as is well known, to Gujarat as the laboratory of a Hindu state. Now, what does this mean? I think it becomes very clear to us when we remember what happened in 2002, when we remember the mass rapes and the unimaginable forms of sexual violence which took place then, and which have been courageously testified to by the survivors, and which have been documented by a whole series of human rights organizations. And I just wanted to briefly remind us of how Tanika Sarkar, in an article which is very well known, described this violence when she said, the pattern of cruelty suggests 3 things. 1, the woman's body was a site of almost inexhaustible violence, with infinitely plural and innovative forms of torture. 2nd, their sexual and reproductive organs were attacked with special savagery. And 3rd, their children, born and unborn, shared the attacks and were killed before their eyes. And when we talk about Gujarat being a laboratory, what this really means is that that is the Gujarat model which has been replicated across India in different locations since then. It's been replicated in Odisha in 2007 to 8, where the Christian communities were targeted, and most recently in the context of the BJP's current national election campaign, we've seen it happen in Muzaffarnagar in UP. And in each of these cases, it wasn't a case of spontaneous communal conflict, but planned, systematic, and organized violence. And we have to realize that targeting of minority women for this kind of appalling violence is not some kind of side effect. It's absolutely central to the project of the Hindu right and the way that it operates. This idea goes back to the earliest ideologies of the Hindu right, the appeal to Hindu men to rape Muslim women to reassert their masculinity, and it's remained very much part of the whole patriarchal nationalist narrative of Hindutva. And as in other far-right organizations and movements, Hindutva mobilizes women, women who are identified as Hindu, for this violence. At the same time, it's underpinned by an intensely patriarchal conception of women's role as primarily wives and mothers and as needing to be controlled. And in this context, we're seeing today the intensification of surveillance and control over women, the rise of so-called moral policing, targeting students and other young people. And we're seeing the invocation of this idea of the protection of Hindu women as a justification for yet more violence against religious minorities and Dalits. So this ideology is also reflected in the activities of the Hindu right here in Britain. As in India, they have been promoting this myth of so-called love jihad. For example, in 2007, we had the Hindu Forum of Britain making completely unfounded allegations about young Hindu women students in British universities being targeted for forcible conversions by Muslim extremists. And this fits in very well in this country with the agenda of the British state and its Islamophobia. For example, at that time you had the police commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Ian Blair, immediately saying that he would commit his force to action to tackle this, despite the evidence of despite the absence of any evidence. And his remarks were then widely reported in the British media. Yet a few months later, the police were unable to cite a single case of this actually happening. Also in Britain, we have lobbyists like Saffron Chase and organizations like Barry Gardiner MP's Labour Friends of India and the Conservative Friends of India, promoting the myth about Modi's Gujarat as a model for economic development. The reality, when we look at Gujarat today, you have 44.6% of children under 5 malnourished, figures which are comparable only to the poorest states in India. You have nutritional poverty, which is higher than all India levels. And really what you have is ordinary people in Gujarat paying a price for Modi's policies, in which whole swathes of land and coastline have been converted into special economic zones or special investment regions and handed over to corporates. And of course, these same policies which give a free hand to corporate exploitation are attracting the support of transnational corporations, Indian and foreign, and they've also led the British government here to tentatively rehabilitate Modi. And when the Minister of State for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Hugo Swire, met Modi in Ahmedabad, he made it very clear that this was all about the UK's national interests, meaning the interests of British big business. So before I conclude, I just want to ask what this so-called Gujarat development model has meant for women. Because Modi too is adopting the language now of women's empowerment. Well, the 2011 census showed that the sex ratio in Gujarat was only 918 women per 1,000 men, below the already scandalous national average of 940. It's one of only 3 Indian states with a downward trend in the sex ratio. It's also well below the national average in the school enrollment of girls. It has very high rates of domestic violence and very low conviction rates. And perhaps all this is epitomized by the fact that in 2007, Narendra Modi actually appointed Maya Kodnani as Minister for Women and Child Development. And as many of you know, she's since been convicted for leading the mobs and handing out weapons during the single largest instance of mass murder during 2002, the Naroda Party attack, in which more than 100 people, the majority women and children, were murdered. So it's very important clearly to have this and many of the other events which have been taking place in London during recent weeks and months in the context of the British government's current moves to bring Modi back into the fold, because events like this send a message that this is not being done in our name. It's also important because of the very disturbing attempts we're seeing now to silence opponents, reflected in the kind of self-censorship we're seeing in the media in India, where high-profile journalists who have been outspokenly critical of Modi are being removed, are being sacked, and so on. This has been possible because in the periods and the states where the Hindu right has been in power, they've systematically infiltrated state structures at all levels. And within this, the targeting of women who have stood up to the Hindutva agenda has been especially acute, and they have faced a whole range of misogynistic threats and abuse. But despite this, resistance continues. And we have to remember that there are those who are continuing now to courageously bear witness to the atrocities which have occurred, who are continuing to fight to bring those responsible to justice. And we're particularly honored to have with us today Nishrin Jafri Hussain, who has been campaigning for justice for the victims and survivors of the horrific violence against minority communities which took place in Gujarat in 2002, many of whom are people who she has known since her childhood. As many of you already know, Nishrin's father, the MP Hussain Jafri, was brutally murdered during the violence, and her family is continuing to fight to bring Narendra Modi to justice. We're also delighted to have with us Dr. Angana Chatterji, who is a cultural anthropologist at the University of Berkeley and a leading human rights specialist. In 2005, she convened a People's Tribunal in Odisha, calling attention to the impending violence against minorities and the religion as oppression. In 2009, her collaborative work through a People's Tribunal she convened in Jammu and Kashmir called attention to the issue of unknown graves and the need for accountability to the families of the disappeared, and subsequently received corroboration from the State Human Rights Commission of Jammu and Kashmir. And her publications include Violent Gods, Hindu Nationalism in India's Present, Narratives from Orissa, a co-edited volume, Contesting Nation, Gendered Violence in South Asia, and the reports Buried Evidence, Unknown, Unmarked and Mass Graves in Kashmir, Communalism in Orissa, and Without Land or Livelihood. And finally, last but very much not least, we have Meena Kandasamy, who is a writer, activist, and political columnist. She's published 2 collections of poetry, Touch and Miss Militancy, and her first novel, The Gypsy Goddess, revisits the 1968 Gilvanmani massacre, where feudal landlords in Tanjore killed 44 Dalit peasants, striking for higher wages. And in fact, she will be here for the launch of her latest book next month, and there's information available about her here. Meena's work is centered on caste annihilation, the Tamil national question, and feminism in contemporary India. So I'd like to call on Nishrin first to